ABC Women would like to thank BIPOC Executive Search for sponsoring today's episode.
The BIPOC Executive Search app is here for you. Get information about job opportunities we're recruiting for. Keep up to date and in the know about career news tailored to Indigenous, Black, and other racialized audiences. Gain helpful tips and learnings to help you on your career trajectory, celebrate job appointments, and more. The BIPOC Executive Search app, here to elevate the candidate experience for Black, Indigenous, and communities of color. Free to download and available on iPhone and Android smartphones.
Look how far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment, it's your time. You stood tall and now you see, standing in your destiny. 100 woman, growing strong. 100 woman, where you belong. You stood tall and now you see, you have reached your destiny, woman.
100 ABC Women would like to take this opportunity to welcome our viewers and listening audience, families, friends, and our sponsors to our inspirational conversations, fireside chats with 100 ABC honorees. 100 Accomplished Black Canadian Women is a bold initiative created by the co-authors, the Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine, a former MP, Donna Jones-Simmons, a corporate diversity executive, and Dr. Denise O'Neill-Green, Vice President, Equity and Community Inclusion at Ryerson University. Our mission is to celebrate and archive the professional accomplishments of trailblazing Black women from all across Canada. The goal is to create an ever-expanding database available for current and future generations via print media, public and private libraries, as well as a website, which is www.100abcwomen.ca. We are pleased to bring you a series of fireside chats, which include conversations around education, healthcare, entertainment, creative arts, legal, technology, entrepreneurship, diversity and equity, media, engineering, politics, sports, and so much more. These, we know, are topics that matter to us and to you. These educational and inspirational conversations will be made available to all current and future generations via our 100 ABC YouTube channel. This is a great way to learn from our elders, brilliant-minded and accomplished Black Canadian women.
Bonjour and greetings, and welcome to another inspirational chat here with 100 ABC Women, inspiring conversation and inspiring growth. Today, our topic will be education within the time of the global pandemic, focusing on the impact to us here in Canada. I'd like to introduce our illustrious panelists. We have Ms. Thando Hyman, we have Dr. Kimberley Tavares, we have Dr. Camille Logan, and Dr. Delores Mullings. Thank you for joining us, ladies. Today, let's first see if we can have our panelists tell everybody about themselves, just a little about yourselves, if you don't mind. So firstly, Ms. Hyman, if you can kindly tell us a little bit about yourself.
Greetings all, my name is Thando Hyman. I am a principal in the Toronto District School Board, and I serve in various roles as a social justice educator and continue to do that good work, not just in the community realm, but certainly in the educational realm.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hyman. Dr. Kimberley Tavares, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Happily. Hi, everyone. My name is Kim Tavares. I am currently an education officer in the Education Equity Secretariat at the Ministry of Education, coming from a vice principalship in York Region. Prior to that, a lot of my work has been around supporting the academic and well-being needs of students of African and Caribbean descent, and continuing to look at how anti-Black racism works in our education system and looking at strategies to dismantle it. So that is a lot of the work that I do now.
Excellent, thank you kindly. Dr. Logan, you can tell us about yourself, please.
Sure, hello everyone. My name's Camille Logan, and I'm currently Associate Director in the Peel District School Board, and have just arrived at a new district after being in York Region District School Board for a number of years, and have been engaged in work around equity, inclusivity, looking at anti-racism and anti-oppression for many, many years, decades now, when we think about it, and have really been committed to that work. And it's my pleasure to have an opportunity to engage in this dialogue with these incredible women to talk about the topic today, and also to talk about the ways in which education, I think, is growing and improving and having a great impact on our students. So looking forward to engaging in the dialogue today.
Excellent, thank you kindly, thank you. And finally, Dr. Mullings, can you talk to us a bit about yourself? Thank you.
Thank you. Hail up, everybody. Good evening. My name is Delores Mullings. As you've been told, I'm an associate professor and interim associate dean of undergraduate programs at Memorial University in the School of Social Work. I'm committed to and have been engaged in research looking at using anti-Black racism, Afrocentric theory, and critical race theory to explore the avenues of Blackness and anti-Blackness as it relates to Black people in Canada, primarily at their intersections. I also do focus on decolonizing the classroom, really so that we can have a better learning and teaching environment and spaces for all our students. Thank you.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you so much. Ladies, I have to say, you know, I'm glad I'm not responsible for putting together any of your business cards, because I mean, if they got to go just by letter, getting all of the work you all on inclusion, diversity, and dealing with yes, it must be tricky, but that speaks to the depth of the work that you're doing, and we appreciate it. So first up, Ms. Hyman, if you don't mind speaking to us about what was life pre-pandemic in education in Canada. Can you talk to us a little bit about that, please?
So we do know that there has been a great impact of COVID-19 internationally for people of African descent, for Black people around the world. And that has impacted us to the extent where healthcare, education, access to learning tools has been quite an issue for our communities wherever we are. Pre-pandemic, however, I want to talk a little bit about education. As one of society's most major institutions, it plays both a vital and fundamental role in helping us build a fair and just society. And because we know that education can serve as that great equalizer to determine student outcomes, to determine their success, their academic achievement, and can improve their life choices, it serves as a foundation by which many careers, professions, and dare I say, dreams are built. So to that end, the quest to ensure that education serves the needs of all students, especially in the areas of equity, education, inclusion rather, and representation, a greater analysis of education revealed that it could no longer be a one-size-fits-all pre-pandemic. We needed to examine special education and the high prevalence of students of African descent in those programs that were being pushed out into particular careers, etc. We needed to examine streaming and how streaming cut off life choices and life chances for students. We needed to examine Afrocentric principles as the first Afrocentric principle of Canada's inaugural alternative school. I worked tirelessly with many educators throughout the nation to ensure that Afrocentric education was one that would be considered a viable option for our students. And using that work as a think tank to explore culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy was one of the current things that was on the minds of many educators. How do students see themselves reflected positively, not solely in the curriculum, but within society? We needed to take a look at gender equity and see how our texts, our resources were balanced in their approach in terms of how people saw themselves. We needed to look at an inclusion model and a reframing by which students could opt into education, so that that one size fits all needed to be interrogated. It needed to be redressed. It needed to span the different contexts and relevance and realities that we see ourselves in. So when it came to education, we knew that there are many different levers that needed to be addressed, because many of the underachievement of our students, whether they be Black students, children of color, whether they be racialized students, needed to be understood as, a way that we needed to figure out how to do things better. The thing about education is, if we don't see education as that great lever, then we need to remember that it is our work, right, that spurs change. And so in looking at curriculum relevance, looking at curriculum development, we needed to make sure that those changes were ongoing.
Indeed, for sure. Sounds like there was a lot, not just happening, but a lot of focus being placed on creating a stronger foundation for young people, for those seeking education pre-pandemic. Appreciate that very much, Ms. Hyman. So looking at the now then, what we're dealing with now that we've had Ms. Hyman explaining to us about what things were pre-pandemic. Now we are absolutely 100% in the pandemic. And I would imagine that didn't sideline what was happening, but it definitely informed what we now have to deal with and how we are able to address some of what Ms. Hyman has explained to us. So now going forward, Dr. Tavares, can you kindly talk to us, speak to what we are looking at now and a bit of the future as well, and how that changed and how that will affect long-term education for our children and students?
I have to begin answering that question by thinking about the work that people like Thando did pre-pandemic, and the work of the Afrocentric School, the work that people like Dr. Logan have been doing for years, and the foundation that they set that allowed what is happening now to take place. And so I think about that because COVID has really proven that so many things that we called impossible before are possible. Mm. So things that happen only in the context of the Afrocentric School in this one little pocket. The COVID has created the conditions and opened up money sources, revenue streams, things that we said we couldn't do before, tech access in ways that all of that, it really brings into question the rationales that were given before, why we couldn't address inequities in education, why we didn't have what we needed to do to create the spaces where it wasn't about a student's poverty, but about the classism. It wasn't about the student's race, but the racism. And so I think one of the greatest things that has come out of COVID that I have seen is that we are now in a place where we are actively naming and openly and intentionally addressing anti-Black racism, systemic racism, and discrimination. For the government to name it and say that this exists in our schools in July of last year was a complete shift, because we'd never done that before. We talk about equity. We love the language of all, because in the language of all, we can get lost and not actually address the needs of the individual. And what has happened is that we've actively been pulling that back. And now we are saying, no, anti-Black racism is a thing. It's a real thing. We've known it's a real thing, right? It was in, we go back to the For Love of Education report that came out, all of the work of people like Dr. Carl James, Patrick Solomon before he passed away. There are amazing scholars who have been looking at this work, Annette Henry, Dr. Mullins, like people have been doing this, but we've never, we know, people in the community, people who have children in the community, people who care about the outcomes of all have seen this. But there has been a lack of, I would say, provincial level, systemic level address. And so the first thing is that we are naming it, and you can't address something if you don't name it. You can't put strategic plans in place if you don't name it. And to that end, COVID has allowed the development of systemic strategies. So what has happened prior is we still stayed in a kind of individualization model where we talked about having to fix the kid or fix the community or fix the family. That was a lot of the public narrative. We have to change what the child is doing, right? We have to change the outcomes for that community. And this is now a new conversation about, well, what are the systemic barriers that are limiting the opportunities for all the children? That is relatively new language that you are hearing in popular discourse or conversations. And so the address of, when Thando mentioned we had to start looking at streaming, now there's a systemic look at streaming. It's not happening just in this board or in this school with this particular principal, but across the province. There is a commitment to looking at streaming. There is a commitment that no child in kindergarten or grade 1 or grade 2 should ever be shackled. They should never be in handcuffs. And so there is a look to what it means to suspend or expel children when they are in kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, or grade 3, right? Like the fact that we're having this conversation in 2021 is mind-numbing, but a lot of that is coming out of what is happening here. Something as simple as tech access. We used to talk about poverty and having to address poverty, but a lot of the discourse is now moving to, no, we need to address classism and the ways in which our education system is biased against people coming from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So when I saw COVID happen and suddenly I saw schools giving out laptops and schools were giving out phones so students could have Wi-Fi access, I was like, wait a second, for a long time we couldn't do that. We didn't have the money for that. In the span of weeks, children across the province were getting access. Schools, people were being innovative and creative. Suddenly they had internet hubs in communities so that if you didn't have access to Wi-Fi at home, you could come into the space. Or, people were making deals with telephone companies in ways that we never did before. So I think some of those shifts are huge. One of the other shifts is the ways in which community and marginalized voices, racialized voices, Black voices are now sitting at decision-making tables. In the past, we had, the community roundtable, and we had all of these, we have reports. We can go back for years and years and talk about reports from community. But now we are in a situation where community is coming in and community is being seen as experts. When we used to talk about, subject matter experts, they were never, if you didn't have PhD, EDD behind your name, and even then if you did but were racialized, you still kind of got a side eye. Now these people are at the table making decisions, being heard in echelons and communities that they were never a part of before. Work is going back to them, and there's this kind of, where in the spaces that I work, I see a kind of iterative model where they're coming in, giving ideas. The ideas are being taken by the people who write policy, write things, and then it's going back to the community for further input. So it's no longer a one way, but you really see a kind of duality of transmission that I never used to see. And so I think COVID has really created that space, while at the same time, the targeted supports of the past are still there. So we haven't removed one for the other, but things like Black graduation coaches and targeted funding for students who are currently underperforming, that is still there. but it's there with a focused intentionality around addressing the systemic barrier. So it's not up to the kid and their family to figure out how to navigate, it's up to the system, their practice, to create a new space. So that's how I would think that I see what the pandemic has done and how we are shifting our movements now and into the future to make change for what education can look like for our students.
Fabulous, fabulous. So it sounds to me like we're actually seeing investment in these students, right?
A very different kind of investment. That is changing barriers. That is, it was really disrupting the status quo, whereas before we had to navigate the status quo, now we're disrupting it.
Hashtag disruption. I don't have a problem with that under any circumstances. Thank you so much. Dr. Logan, piggybacking on what has been said by Dr. Tavares, talk to us a bit about the positive moves the state holds. Now that this has been the greatest of disruption, that being the pandemic, not the awesome disruption that we were just talking about in our education system. Can you identify a few solutions, a few positive moves for everyone being teachers and students and parents? What does that look like?
Thank you. And I think, as I was listening to what Thando was sharing at the very beginning and taking us back to work that's been happening really around education in the context of addressing specifically anti-Black racism and inequities pre-pandemic, decades, and the work that was happening with regards to, for instance, the Afrocentric school, specifically thinking about how to affirm students and their identities. That's been happening pre-pandemic. And when, listening to Dr. Tavares just now talking about the ways in which those particular strategies are now coming to the fore and being recognized as strategies that can achieve success, particularly for Black students, speaks to the fact that the solutions were always there. The solutions were always there, right? So and sadly, it has taken the pandemic, and it has taken the global awakening that we all have been engaged in with regards to the death of George Floyd, brought a global awakening. We as people of African descent, as Black people, have known what has been happening and have been experiencing it either personally or in the context of us as a people. We have known all of that for decades, and yet now the world has become awakened to what many are calling also the systemic racism pandemic. And so this has now had a particular impact on education, where all of the strategies that have been seen and understood as aspirational are now being put into action, finally. And I have to say, although they are being put into action, it's not happening necessarily easily either. There is still resistance, there is still trepidation, and there's still lots of work that has to happen in order for things to be able to happen for the success, specifically of Black students and racialized students, and those who have been, we know that our school system has been operating through dominant ideology, through norms around white middle class understandings and ways of knowing. And now that is finally being questioned in a way that's being positioned as a system of education, which I think is being presented differently, but it hasn't been before. And so now when we are talking about the over-policing of students, Black students in schools and their surveillance, when we're talking about the inequitable outcomes, we're talking about disproportionality, when we're talking about hiring and representation of staff, the solutions that have been talked about for decades are now being actively positioned in a way in school boards. And I have to also acknowledge that, as Dr. Tavares was just saying as well, community has been able to mobilize in a way that is holding school boards accountable. And I think the pandemic has allowed for communities to connect with one another, because we're all virtual right now. And so the communities in Durham are connecting with the communities in Thunder Bay, which are connected with the communities in Nova Scotia, and connecting with the communities in York and Durham. and coming together to say, we are all experiencing something that's endemic in education. And so we need to have a collective way in which to respond and are really holding school boards accountable. And so we are seeing various school boards coming together to create anti-Black racism strategies, or dismantling rather anti-Black racism strategies, ways in which school boards are actively disrupting and creating programs. And so what we're also seeing, not only with school boards, but also community organizations are being leveraged to work in partnership with school boards to create all kinds of after-school programs, programming that's happening during the school, programming that's happening on weekends, and also working in collaboration to help to shape and shift education so that we are affirming Black students and the richness that we know exists in our children, that brilliance, that genius is finally being recognized in a way that school boards are being held accountable and classroom teachers are seeking ways to leverage that for the success of our students. And so when I think about the solutions and the successes, I would say that all of those things that have been there for, as I said, decades, are now being surfaced in a way and being leveraged so they're actually being actualized. So we're seeing all kinds of programs specifically targeted for Black girls, Black boys that are focused on programming, coding, focused on STEM, focused on the arts, ways in which to leverage Afrocentric learning and programming. All of these pieces are now being brought to the fore, finally. And so really right now, again, around the solutions, there is so much that is there. And I think that one of the things that we should also think about is having a provincial approach to the way in which we are doing the work. School boards, I think, are still operating in silos, essentially to be able to address the disparities and outcomes. And we know that, again, it's endemic to education. So I think we should be looking at a provincial approach where we are all working in concert with one another to address the various outcomes of our students for the betterment of their success in school and education.
Fabulous. So I'm hearing that the accountability is shifting, right? That it's intensifying, that it's becoming more comprehensive, and that is always good news. Always good news. Having a situation where we understand that at any point things are not what are required. There's going to be the community, there are going to be the educators, there are going to be the parents there to ensure that things are placed back on track.
If I could just add, I just remembered,
yes, please do.
Which is terrible as I'm thinking, I forgot about students and student voice, because student voice has now become incredibly prominent. It was always there. And now, again, school boards are actively creating space for students and hearing the students and the brilliance and the genius that they have in order to be able to address the various ways that schools have not worked with them as well.
Creating space? What does that look like?
For example, a number of different school boards now are actively creating space through, for example, Black Students Associations, or creating various advocacy roles for Black students in school. So that student voice with regards to the way that Black students have been experiencing school is actively being sought and heard, along with the solutions that they have for the way that they have been experiencing school and the expectations that they have for change.
Excellent. That's also very encouraging. Okay, Dr. Delores Mullings. What we're seeing and what we're learning as we go through this is that there's a lot going on in class. There's a lot going on in the administrative structure, that there's a lot going on with respect to investment and with respect to accountability. We also know that learning happens more, it's more than just what happens in the classroom. Teaching is more than just what happens in the classroom, although that is a huge component. So talk to us a little bit about the way that the pandemic has affected in-school teaching. Can you identify for us, what else is affected that is affiliated with going to school? What does that picture look like? Talk to me.
Thank you for the question. And before I respond, I'd like to just acknowledge that I'm sitting on the Haudenosaunee people's land. And I also want to give honor to my ancestors whose backs helped to build this Canada, this nation state, and whose shoulders and heads I stand on today as I try to do whatever work that I'm engaged in. And yes, so Ms. Hyman, Dr. Tavares, and Dr. Logan has talked about how the spaces have opened up for Black students and some of the amazing things that's happening. And so I think what we also, for me, we also need to think about what else is happening as spaces are opening up and there's, you know, anti-Black racism is being looked at. So combining anti-Black racism and this COVID-19 pandemic, as we've heard through research, people talking about their experience, it's actually a deadly combination. So I'm speaking to what I call the legalization of voyeurism and the explicit educational surveillance as it relates to Black bodies in education. So if education was inaccessible before COVID-19, we really shouldn't be fooled in thinking that the high uptake of online learning and teaching in these environments has leveled the playing field. In fact, online learning has exacerbated systemic anti-Black racism in which this legalization of peering into our homes is happening. I'll explain. So in Canada, to be found guilty of voyeurism, this is what used to be called the peeping Tom law. It must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, and I'm not a lawyer, but beyond a reasonable doubt that you secretly observed or recorded a person in a situation where they have a reasonable expectation of privacy. So with the mass implementation of video teaching and learning, Black bodies are under the gaze more than ever before. Because now everyone, and I mean everyone, from teachers, social workers, librarians, colleagues, lawyers, students, everyone has a front row view of our homes and our privacy. So our homes have become public spaces accessible to anyone in our video interactions. We no longer can escape the tyranny of white supremacist voyeurism, gaze by seeking shelter in our homes, because in fact, it's right here in front of us. So pre-pandemic, when we were brutalized, we could go home, you know, and seek the safety of our homes and, you know, nurse ourselves back into preparation for the next wave of attack. Now everything has changed. There's a heightened level of scrutiny in the online environment where those in positions of authority have full access to people to judge, surveil, and harass. And we know that, you know, for students who experience poverty, you know, they really can't find a space in their homes to do online learning. And sometimes there are things that's happening in the background of their homes that now everybody have access to, you know, what's happening at home. And the judgment around who can afford, the judgment around what's in the background of people's homes and what's happening in their homes has become a little bit of a challenge for some Black students. And I mean Black students and teachers too, across the spectrum, right? So what I recommend is for us to actually find a space that we can carve out for ourselves to say, this is where I'm going to do school. If the space is available, sometimes it's not because of where people live and who they live with. You know, and use that space only for school, again, if possible. But as we're being peered upon and surveilled, I also suggest that we do some education. And that education may mean putting out some books in your background, if you can, find a space, or putting up some art or something around, your spirituality and Black culture, displaying any kind of those things. So for example, this book is something that, people could put out, or something like that. Around spirituality, you can put something like this out. A lot of times people think that our children don't know anything about poetry or a particular part of the arts. So, you can show that you actually have books of poetry. And, as my colleagues on this panel spoke about, the kind of leadership that's happening in this pandemic environment, we can actually showcase some of our written work around Black leadership. And if all else fails, you can bring out your manual air condition for people to see that you not only have art in your manual air condition, but you can cool yourself down when it's necessary. Thank you.
Oh, that's fabulous. I'm all about functionality, keeping yourself cool while sending the message at the same time. Fair enough. Before we wrap up, is there anything that our panel would like our viewers to know, anything that we might have missed? I mean, obviously, this is a very, very large topic, and we could go on for some time, but if there's anything that anybody has to offer. Actually, you know what? Everyone was pretty comprehensive. So, at this point, I'm fishing, which is just because I'm enjoying the topic so much, and maybe that's not fair. So let us say this. Thank you so much to our panelists for providing us with the information that you have, to our esteemed honorees. And if anybody wishes to know what excellence looks like, take a look at our panelists. Thank you today for participating, everyone out there in virtual land, and to our panelists. À la prochaine, tout le monde. Thank you, and until next time. I'm Alyson Renaldo, Director of Communications for the 100 ABC Initiative. Take care. See you next time. Cheers.
Look how far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment, it's your time. You stood tall and now you see, standing in your destiny.